Hello! Welcome back to my channel and to my mid-year book freakout tag for 2023. I know it's August, so it's a little late, but I just saw Jack Edwards post one, so I think I'm in the window of acceptable publishing time. We'll go through the sort of 11, 13 questions that are on the list and kind of review my reading thus far. Also, just an FYI, I'm getting over COVID and I currently have like a lot of stuffy nose and gravel going on in my voice, so we're just gonna have to ignore that. So, for the best book I've read so far in 2023, I think they're kind of tied right now, two books of very different, not caliber, two books with very different tones. The first of those books that comes to mind for me is Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers and its sequel, Prayer for the Crown Shy. I loved these little novellas. They are very much like true cozy sci-fi stories about a tea monk and a sentient robot that meet in the woods. They are just so heartwarming and such a, I don't know, like tiny permission structure for the people who feel a little lost in their life to just be okay with not quite knowing your purpose. I love Becky Chambers' voice. I love all of the books that she's written, but I thought that these really captured like the best of what I love about a Becky Chambers book. Their kindness, their curiosity about humanity, a really delightful setting, and just such endearing characters to follow. My other best book of the year is The German Wife by Kelly Reimer, which is very different, but also really, really fantastic book. Another 5-star read. It follows two different families through the 1930s through the 1950s, exploring the Depression, obviously World War II, and all of the big changes that happened in society post-World War II. It's a book with so much humanity at its center, and a book that I thought really did a great job of just inserting a lot of nuance into stories that I think we all think we know. Kelly Reimer just has such a way of putting you in the shoes of real, complicated people facing incredibly difficult choices, and gives us room to have deep empathy for all of the main characters, even as they make choices that make your tummy turn. So I thought it was really fantastic. Highly recommend. And honestly, I'm not a big historical fiction reader, but it's the kind of book that makes me want to read more historical fiction. I listened to it on audio through Scribd, and the narrator was really fantastic, so I highly recommend it as an audiobook. But just in general, however you prefer to consume books, The German Wife is, in my opinion, a must-read. Next on the list is best sequel you've read thus far. And here again, I think I have a bit of a tie. First is Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo, which is the sequel to Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. These books are sort of an occult, dark academia story set at Yale and follows a girl who can see ghosts and who is recruited into one of the sort of magic-using, powerful secret societies at Yale. Specifically, the society she is recruited for is in charge of sort of managing and overseeing all of the other groups to make sure that they're not engaging in serious abuse of power, basically. These books are so dark, but they're also really thrilling and usually include sort of a, not mystery of the week, but for lack of a better term, mystery of the week story, along with a much larger arc that we are connecting into. They also aren't told in chronological order, so there's a lot of bouncing around in these books, which can be kind of hard to follow, but I do think that they are really well done, and this sequel was a really thrilling next step in the series. I will say they're a little convoluted, and so if you haven't read Ninth House and you're planning to pick up Hellbent, I would recommend looking up a summary. Leigh Bardugo does not spend a lot of time getting you up to speed. She makes a lot of references very quickly to stuff that if you are at all like me and hadn't read the first book in several years, took a while to kind of catch up and be like, oh yeah, that's what she means. So this was a solid sequel. The second best sequel I read this year was The Shadow Cabinet by Juno Dawson. This is a follow-on to Her Majesty's Royal Coven, also by Juno Dawson. I love these books. They're like watching a soap opera about witches in the modern day. It just has such compulsive, just like incredibly wild plot. And follows a group of witches who were good friends growing up and who are now in slightly different places as they're adults, but definitely still have that deep childhood love and connection with each other. And it follows a wild story. The most basic premise, without giving any spoilers, is that like there is a prophecy about something potentially ending the world, and there's a dispute within the coven about what the source of that prophecy is, like who is the cursed child who will cause the end of the world. This book is full of great like LGBTQ representation, like I said, super compulsive plot, and this sequel picked up after a wild plot twist at the end of the last book, and did not disappoint. I felt like it was a really great follow-on and did so much to humanize characters who I think the first book really set up as villains. So I thought Juno Dawson did a great job with giving us a really robust character arc in the sequel. The next question is a new release that you're really excited about but haven't read yet this year. For me, that is The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty. This is supposed to be a pirate story about a like fearsome female pirate captain who is kind of like in her middle age, is done with all of her pirating, but gets called back for one last big score. And that's literally all I know about it. It sounds delightful. I love like heist and con man stories, so I think most pirate tales kind of slot into that larger umbrella category, and I love like a classic adventure quest structure. So I've heard great things about this book. I am desperate to read it before the end of the year. Next is most anticipated release of the second half of the year, and for me that is definitely The Fragile Threads of Power by V.E. Schwab, which is the follow-on series to A Darker Shade of Magic, which was a trilogy that V.E. Schwab released probably like a decade ago. A Darker Shade of Magic was originally released in 2015, so these books have been completed for a while, and I would say the end of the first trilogy had a lot of loose ends that I'm really curious to see V.E. Schwab kind of tie up or perhaps unravel even further. I don't know much about what the plot is supposed to be of the book. I haven't consumed a lot about what to expect, other than the fact that it's going to be set in the same world and we're going to get at least a couple of the same main characters. I loved Kel and Delilah as main characters in the original trilogy, and I think we're going to see them at least in part in these new books, so I'm just pumped to see what comes next with the series, and I'm really excited to have more of this story and more of this world. The basic premise of the world is that there are sort of 4 parallel like universes or worlds, all of which centered around London. So there's 4 Londons: a black London, a white London, a red London, and a gray London. Our main character Kel is from red London, where magic is abundant and healthy and flowing. Delilah is from gray London, which is like our world, a mundane world without magic. Black London is where terrible things happened and the world has basically been destroyed through the abuse of magic. And White London has really scarce magic, and it is used in really sort of brutal, abusive ways. And so the White London is kind of like on the verge of disaster. So we're talking parallel universes and magical people who can travel between those worlds. So it's just a really great premise for a world. I love how the world has been built up to date, and I'm really excited to see what V.E. Schwab does with it next. Next is biggest disappointment of 2023, and for me that has been Hex by Jenny Fagan. So Hex is a story that, like, in a synopsis sounds like it was made for me. It's a story about a woman from the 21st century who's a witch, time traveling back to Edinburgh in like the 1500s to be with a young witch, or accused witch, who is a witch, on her last night of her life, the evening before she's executed. And it kind of draws parallels between the witch trials and modern day abuses towards women. I love witch stories. I love feminist fiction. And I'm like personally really interested in the sort of metaphor and through lines available narratively when we look at the witch trials and modern day themes about women. And I was so excited about this book. It's a tiny little novella. I thought, what a great read. But the whole thing was just really too on the nose for me. First, I thought that the dialogue and writing structure were really confusing. We switch perspectives every other chapter, once from the girl from the past and then once from the girl who has traveled back to the past. It was really hard to follow whose perspective we were in at any given time. And the dialogue is kind of hard to follow, at least from an American perspective. There's a lot of like key words that get dropped off the beginning of sentences that make it difficult to kind of follow who's referring to what. On top of this being hard to follow, I felt like it was just like too on the nose. It didn't feel like there was a lot of nuance in how we were drawing through lines through some of these themes. And I just felt like it was just really disappointing. It was really disappointing. I actually decided not to finish it, which is remarkable because it's only like a 100-page book, but I found it like actively frustrating me. And I don't know, it might be more affecting if you're like newer to some feminist themes and like exploring some of these ideas in other contexts. But for me, it wasn't original, and it was kind of like hammering home almost like on the wrong things to emphasize, in my opinion. And it was a bummer. So I really, 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 really wanted to love Hex and just didn't. It fell really flat for me. Next question is biggest surprise of 2023, and for me that is definitely Paris, a memoir by Paris Hilton. I listened to this on audio, again through Scribd, and I was just like blown away. It was hilarious, it was heartbreaking, it was absurd at times. And it was really, really, like earnest. Like it was a remarkable story. I knew going in that it was going to cover a lot of the experiences of abuse that Paris Hilton had when she was sent away to one of these like tough love schools that were, really popular in the early aughts. Obviously, those themes were discussed and they were really, really hard-hitting. Her story of abuse is really powerful and really disturbing. I actually didn't realize that the school that she went to was associated with the Synanon cult. One of the things I really liked about the way she told this story was it was kind of similar to I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy, in that she really uses the voice of the child she was at the time to describe certain scenarios that she was in, right? Like you really hear what it was like to be 16 and going through this, and you hear the difference in how she describes her life now with that more adult voice. But I was really surprised too that she brought such a strong like power lens to the conversation. Like she wasn't just describing her abuse, but she was talking about and identifying in her life story all of the places where larger structures, larger ideas and value systems informed and created power structures that facilitated her abuse. And I just thought that was really well executed, and I was really surprised by that. I didn't expect to get such a thorough analysis from Paris Hilton, which is on me, honestly. I also felt like, as I said, it was just hilarious. Like she is so funny. And there's definitely moments of like absurdity, right? Like she is uber wealthy. She's really invested in like the metaverse and like NFTs. But overall, the book was just like unputdownable. I think I finished it in the span of 24 hours. And it knocked my socks off. It was one of the best books I've read this year. And I didn't expect it to be as hard-hitting as it really was. Next is new favorite author, and this could be a debut author or a new author to you, and for me is definitely Tracy Deonn, who wrote the Legend Board series. We are on book 2 of at least 3. I'm not sure how many she's gonna write, but the Legend Born books are just like next level fun. They would have been 5-star books for me if the YA romance wasn't quite so fast, which is just not to my taste, but overall the books were so fun. The basic premise is we follow a young black girl who is on an early college program at UNC. While she's there, she comes into contact with a secret society of people who have magic and are kind of like living with the reincarnation of the King Arthur myth. So there's a lot of things I love there, right? Like I love a secret society on a university campus. I love King Arthur myth and myth retelling generally. But the books are just so plot forward. Like they are action packed. You really can't put them down. The characters are really fun and really clever and earnest and likable. And I think that she deals with really real, really heavy themes around grief, around racism. And she gives all of those themes to a group of like 16 to 18-year-olds. And the fact of the matter is, like, those are real things that impact people's real lives, even at that early age. And so I think she does a good job of like talking about real stuff that real teenagers go through, but giving it this incredible like joy and mysticism that comes with this like magic setting and the Arthur retelling. So I just loved these books. I cannot wait to see the end of this series and what Tracy Deonn does next. Next question is new fictional crush, and I don't crush on a lot of like the main romantic leads in the books that I read, but I will say the entire cast of Witch Hat Atelier is just so stinking cute. These books have brought me so much joy, and I think it's fair to say I am crushing on all of their art styles. Like, it's just a beautiful, beautiful book series. It's a manga series. But the artwork is just incredible. So delightful. So endearing. Really enjoyed reading the series and getting to follow a bunch of kids learning about magic and learning about all of the power that comes with that magic. I've described these books a lot in other videos, so to hear more about the story, you can check out my spring reading wrap-up. So next question is, who is your new favorite fictional character? And part of me really wants to say Mosscap from the Monk and Robot books, but given that I already talked about them, I thought I would instead talk about Angrboda, who is the main character in The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichek. This book is a retelling of Norse mythology, specifically following Angrboda, who was the wife of Loki and the first witch. She was also the mother of the 3 sort of key players in the end of the world, Ragnarok. This book really surprised me. I think I consume a lot of myth retelling personally, and a lot of myth retelling is very lit fic-y, right? Like, it's very lyrical and it's like slow on the plot, and we see some things we know from myth, but we are really focusing on just like this beautiful writing and this like internal dialogue. This book was so pacey, and Angrboda is so funny. She's witty, she's whip smart, and she has a rich inner life and a rich social life outside of Loki and outside of the kind of core beats of the myth that she's a part of. So I just loved following her as a main character in this book, and honestly, like, highly recommend it. Like, this is on my top list of all myth retellings. It's so easy to read, so absorbing, and Angrboda is just such a great, like, complex female lead to ground a story in. Okay, number 10, a book that made you cry. For me, this is Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. This is another novella. I listened to it on audio, which was great, and I'm desperate to have a physical copy. This is a story that follows like a very normal Irish family right around Christmas, but it's during the era of Magdalen laundries. So this middle-aged man who runs his own business kind of is confronted with the fact that there is a Magdalene laundry in his backyard. For those of you who don't know, Magdalene laundries were places for fallen women, girls who were pregnant out of wedlock, people who were in one way or another not fitting in to society, and specifically to the church's perception of what a proper young lady is. And so these were places where you sent away your shameful daughter, often pregnant, and they were forced to do physical labor. The church profited from that. Oftentimes their children were taken away from them, sometimes like sold and adopted by other families. People died. Lots of people were severely injured, obviously heavily traumatized. The history of Magdalene laundries is really a dark and disturbing one. And so this is just like a very normal man being confronted with like a very deep horror in his hometown, and facilitated with the incredible power of the church. And it's about what he makes of that, and what he chooses to do with that information, and how he chooses to proceed with his life, knowing that that is happening right there in his backyard. It's a really beautiful story, and I listened to it like doing chores around my house, but was definitely like on the verge of tears, if not actually shedding a few tears while reading. It was just really, really powerful. What's one book that has made you happy? For me, this is definitely Going Postal by Terry Pratchett. I also don't own a physical copy yet. I listened to this on audio. The Harper production audiobooks on these Terry Pratchett books are incredible. Like the audio reader must have an incredible range of like voice acting skills. But Going Postal is one of the like 40 plus books in the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett. They're all comedy fantasy, so they're hilarious to read. And Going Postal is about a con man who is hung within an inch of his life and then presented with a choice in secret by the sort of like supreme ruler of the capital city in this world. He says, you can either be hung to the full of your life and die for your crimes, or you can run the post office because it's a mess and I need the post office to work. And it's about this like reluctant con man coming into contact with all of these ridiculous figures who run the post office, and kind of adventures unfold from there. But it is just so funny. It's really heartwarming. And I think for people who are really loving like the cozy fantasy genre, a lot of Terry Pratchett books probably fall into that category. I would say for me, Going Postal definitely is in that realm of cozy fantasy. It's like relatively low stakes in this sort of magical, nonsensical setting, and with really endearing relationships and lots of good humor that just like warm your heart. So that book definitely made me happy. Okay, we're nearing the end. The next question is, what is the most beautiful book you've bought thus far in 2023? And I here again have two answers. The first, and I would call this like my honorary mention, is A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. Because this book is just unreal. It is so pretty. Like, whoever they get as the cover artist for these books does an impeccable job. Like, not only is the art itself beautiful, but the way that they foil it and laminate it to catch the light, I just think is exquisite. I've talked about this book a lot on my channel already. You can check out my road trip reading vlog if you want more in-depth thoughts on this book. But I think if I had to pick one, my actual answer would be Volume 4 of Lore Olympus by Rachel Smith. I love these books. They are a Hades and Persephone like love story retelling, but in the form of a graphic novel. I originally read this story on Webtoons, and it has since been picked up, and they've released 4 volumes thus far. I think there's pros and cons to the original digital format versus the physical print, but I have just really, really loved having all of these books on hand. They live with all my Greek and Roman myth retelling collection on my shelves, and they are so beautiful to look at. So I'll insert some footage of the pages in this book, but the art is just incredible. And if you're interested in the story, but you don't necessarily want to invest in the physical book yet, you can make a Webtoons account for free, and you can read like the 200 plus episode backlog yourself. So it's wonderful. I highly recommend. Okay, last but not least is what is a book you need to read before the end of the year? Here again, I picked two. The first that I absolutely have to read by the end of the year is Blood in the Mist by Hope Mirrlees. So Blood in the Mist is a 1920s fantasy book. So this is like pre-Tolkien fantasy. It's a fae story about a very like average mayor of this very average town that sits at the intersection of two rivers. One has its source from like a normal place, and the other has its source from fairy. And I believe his son goes missing, and as a part of that, this very normal man, who's very buttoned up and sort of mundane, gets wrapped into an adventure story in the land of the fairies. And I am just dying to read it. Obviously, it's a gorgeous book itself, and it has a ton of praise from like incredibly popular fantasy authors. Like the front of the cover says the single most beautiful and unjustifiably forgotten novel of the 20th century. That's Neil Gaiman. So clearly it's supposed to be a fantastic book, and I have just been missing out. And last but not least is Lavinia by Ursula K. Le Guin. One of my like goals for the year is to read more classic female authors. I don't have a great history of reading like major authors who aren't like contemporaries writing books right now. And last year I started reading a lot of Octavia Butler and was really just blown away by her writing. And so I've since really endeavored to like pick up more classic female authors, and Ursula K. Le Guin is definitely one of those. Her sci-fi and fantasy writing, I think, is really been definitional to the genre. And Lavinia is a Roman myth retelling about Lavinia, who is a figure from the Aeneid by Virgil. And obviously, I've already talked a lot about the fact that I love myth retelling, and Ursula K. Le Guin is like a massive figure who I've read nothing by yet. I'm hoping this book will be a great like entry into reading more of her backlog. Well, there you have it. That's my mid-year book freakout tag. I'd love to know if you've read any of these books, what did you think about them? And also definitely want to know like what are you most excited about to read by the end of the year. We are losing daylight, so we've got to wrap this video up. I am glad that you were here, and we'll see you in my next video. Bye.